What's going on, guys? Welcome to my Oregon State Beavers versus Washington Huskies preview and predictions video. Now, I did also preview Oregon versus Arizona State, so go check out that video. But I'm really trying to keep an eye on Washington and Oregon because I do really want to see that rematch. But you do have the Beavers trying to sneak their way in, as they do play Washington at home this weekend. Then they go on the road and play Oregon next weekend. So the Pac-12 conference is really in a tough situation with a lot on the line. Washington and Oregon are ultimately fighting for a spot in the Pac-12 championship game, and I will be previewing that game for sure if it happens, as it is going to be a big farewell to the Pac-12 conference, with possibly two top 5 teams playing each other in the Pac-12 championship for a playoff spot, depending on how everything else turns out in the top 5. You still got Michigan versus Ohio State, and Florida State still plays Florida, so if Washington and Oregon win out, this game is going to be huge and could definitely be a top 5 matchup. And I also plan on previewing a lot of games for the conference championship week, as there are going to be very big games with playoff implications, probably top 10 matchups, many of them. And if you guys have certain games you will want me to make a video on, just let me know down in the comments below. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. But without further ado, let's get into the Washington Huskies at Oregon State Beavers and give my preview and predictions. This is definitely a big game for the Washington Huskies, as it is their biggest test since the game against Oregon, but Washington could prove a lot in this game. After starting the season off really good and getting compared to 2019 LSU, they've had really high expectations. And after they beat Oregon, they cemented themselves as one of the best teams in the country. But then they had a couple weird games where they scored 15 against Arizona State. And then the next week, they barely beat Stanford, possibly the two worst teams in the Pac-12. Now, they may be 10-0, and they have gotten some decent wins the last couple weeks, and they've been playing a little bit better. They have shown some weaknesses, and they aren't as hyped like they were at the start of the year and after beating Oregon. But Washington has a chance to prove themselves against a pretty good Oregon State team. Oregon State might be the best rushing attack that Washington has played, and Washington has shown weaknesses in their rush defense as they have gave up 140 rush yards per game. They are also near the bottom in the Pac-12 on their pass defense. I wouldn't say the Washington defense is terrible. It does struggle, but they do have something special to this defense and making big defensive plays when it matters the most. Their defense plays good when it needs to. That's something else they do different than most teams do. They do have a very streaky defense, but my question for this game is Washington going to be able to stop that physical offensive line and the style of play that Oregon State has? Oregon State plays a style of play kind of like the NFL. They have a whole bunch of offensive linemen up front. They run I formation. And they have a pretty good offensive line, and Damian Martinez is a tough guy to bring down. And Washington might struggle with stopping the run. Washington did show against Oregon that they can be physical on the defensive side, and we are going to need to see that Washington defense that held its own against the #1 scoring offense in the country in the Oregon Ducks. Something Washington shouldn't struggle with is scoring points and getting Michael Penix Jr. to put up numbers, because Oregon State's pass defense has been pretty bad this year. On paper, they are better defensively than Washington. I don't think Oregon State has a great defense, but I've heard a lot of people say Oregon State has a bad defense. I don't think people give credit for Oregon State and their defense because they have only give up 20 points per game. Oregon State definitely has weaknesses on the defensive side, but it's not as bad as people pointed out to be. But something that I can't ignore is that Oregon State really struggled in their pass defense when they played Washington State. In the first half, Oregon State looked like a middle school defense, giving up 400 passing yards to the Washington State offense. They did play a better second half. I feel like if Oregon State played Washington State again, they would win, and they could easily be at 9-1 right now, but that's not the case as they're 8-2. And Washington State really has fell off after their win against Oregon State, losing 6 in a row. This should be a higher scoring game, but it really does come down to what defense shows up in the fourth quarter. And that team that shows up in the fourth quarter will ultimately win the game. With a win in this game, Washington clinches a spot in the Pac-12 championship game against most likely the Oregon Ducks, which is the rematch everybody wants to see. I don't know if everybody wants to see it, probably not, but I know I want to see it. Washington is at 10-0 right now, and they really need this game. Oregon State isn't an easy place to play as they are undefeated at home this year. And Oregon State has 2 losses coming by only 3 points. This Oregon State team could definitely be 10-0 right now, and it could be a different picture. But let's not look at the what-ifs, because Oregon State is ultimately with 2 losses on the season. This game should be a great game. You definitely don't want to miss this game. If Washington wants to compete with the best teams of the country, they need to stay consistent, and it starts with getting a statement win against Oregon State. Washington's defense really needs to step up. It's very rare to win a national championship without one of the better defenses in the country. But Washington does have the offense, maybe not as good as it was originally thought out to be, But they do have a good offensive line, and despite the numbers on defense, they've shown some light on defense, and their defense has shown up in crunch time. But how many times can they slip away? A win is a win, I do know that, and they did show up in the second half against USC, Oregon, and Utah, and ultimately did show up in the end to beat Arizona State and Stanford. But it's not going to be an easy game against Oregon State, as Oregon State does have a physical offensive line and a good rushing attack. But is Washington a special team that can win a national championship even with the numbers they give up on defense? Because ultimately their defense isn't a bad second half team, and the second half of the game is what matters the most. We'll have to wait and see. There's a lot of teams that are playing good this year, but I've seen some weaknesses with every single team. I mean, even Georgia has shown some weaknesses on defense. They look like the best team in the country right now, but even they've shown some weaknesses. The college football playoff is really open this year, and it's going to be interesting to see how everything turns out. And if Washington can beat the Oregon Ducks with how good the Ducks have looked recently, Oregon will most likely be favorites in that game, but it's going to be a fight. And a huge game for both Oregon and Washington. But before I do get into my prediction on the game, let's give the information on the game and talk about some of the stats. This will be a top 11 matchup, as Oregon State is ranked 11th and Washington is ranked 5th. Oregon State is at 8-2, while Washington is at 10-0. Both teams are fighting for a spot in the Pac-12 championship and are both top 4 in the Pac-12. This game will be played in Corvallis, and Oregon State will have home field advantage. According to ESPN Analytics, Washington is at around a 52.5% chance to win, while Oregon State is at around a 47.5% chance to win. Oregon State is actually 1-point favorites in this game, and the over-under is a little higher at 62.5. This game will be on ABC at 7:30 Eastern Time. Definitely a game a lot of people need to watch. Washington is 5-0 in their last 5 games, winning by 10 points or less every single game. And Oregon State is 4-1 in their last 5 games, coming off a game against Stanford where they scored 62 points. The leading passer for Washington, who leads the country at first, ahead of second place by around 300 yards, is Michael Penix Jr. Nobody touches him in passing yards. Michael Penix Jr. has thrown for 3,533 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, while DJ Uiagalelei for Oregon State has passed for 2,254 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. The rushing leader for Washington is Dillon Johnson, who has ran for 790 yards and 11 touchdowns, while Oregon State's rushing leader is Damian Martinez, who has ran the ball a lot this year for 155 carries, and he's also had 1,024 yards running the ball along with 7 touchdowns. For the receiving leader on Washington, leading arguably the best receiving corps in the country, is led by Rome Odunze, who has had 59 catches on the year for 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns, as he is one of the best receivers in the country. And Oregon State's leading receiver is Anthony Gould, who has 33 catches for 599 yards and only 2 touchdowns. This is a very even game on paper, and it is time to give my predictions for the Oregon State Beavers against the Washington Huskies. And I do have Washington winning this game 35-31, as Washington has shown they can win in crunch time this year. And ultimately, I did say the defense that steps up in crunch time will win the game. So I do have Washington winning a close one. But honestly, I could see this game going literally any way. But that is going to do it for the video. I'm very excited for tomorrow. Even though it is one of the worst slate of games of college football all year, there still will be some fun games. And Washington versus Oregon State is going to be a good one and possibly the best one of the week. So hope you all enjoy the games tomorrow. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as we are on the road to 500 subscribers, which I want to hit by the end of the year. So go ahead and sub and help me out. And also leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And peace out, guys.